Britain has sold at least £4.5 billion in arms to Saudi Arabia and £500 million to the UAE since the war began. The US role is even bigger. Trump authorized arms sales to the Saudis worth $110 billion last May. Yemen will be the defining family crime of this generation, perhaps this century. 274. In August 2018, a report by UN experts said all parties to the conflict may have committed war crimes, including the governments of Yemen, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and the Houthi movement. The UN described the conflict as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The report documented 6,475 deaths in the conflict, but estimated the true number was significantly higher. The report criticized Saudi-led airstrikes and accused parties of unlawful violations such as deprivation of the right to life, arbitrary detention, rape, torture, enforced disappearances and child recruitment. 275. In February 2020, British law firm Stoke White appealed the authorities in Britain, the US, and Turkey tourist senior officials from the United Arab Emirates, UAE, for allegedly carrying out war crimes and torture in Yemen. The complaints were lodged under the provision of universal jurisdiction, wherein the nations must probe breaches of the Geneva Convention for possible war crimes. 276. In March 2020, Human Rights Watch accused Saudi military forces and Saudi-backed Yemeni forces of carrying out abuse of Yemeni civilians in the country's eastern province of Al-Mara. They accused them arbitrarily arresting, torturing, and illegally transferring detainees to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Their court documented 16 cases of arbitrary detention and 5 cases of detainees who had been transferred illegally to Saudi Arabia. 277, 278, according to a report from May 2020 by Yemeni human rights group Watana. Since May 2016, more than 1,600 cases of arbitrary detentions, 770 forced disappearances, 344 cases of torture and at least 66 deaths in unofficial prisons have been documented. The report stated that Houthis were responsible for most abuses. It blamed them for 350 forced disappearances, 138 incidents of torture, and 27 deaths in detention, while UAE-backed forces, including the Southern Transitional Council, were responsible for 327 disappearances, 141 cases of torture, and 25 deaths in detention. The report blamed forces loyal to the Saudi-backed Yemeni government for 65 cases of torture and over 24 deaths. 279. An investigation led by Sky News reported that on the 12th of July, 2020, an airstrike in northern Yemen reportedly carried out by the Saudi-led coalition, hit a family home, killing 6 children and 3 women. The investigators found fragments of the bomb and some of the shrapnel which seemed to be the part of a GBU-12, 500-pound fin-guided bomb, manufactured in the US. The Joint Incidents Assessment Team is still investigating the attack. 280. The United Nations has accused both sides of the conflict of using child soldiers. In August 2018, the UN reported that 2/3 of child soldiers in Yemen fought for the Houthis. The report documented 800 cases of child soldiers in 2017. 281, 282. In December 2018, the New York Times reported that Saudi Arabia had hired child soldiers from Sudan, especially from Darfur and Yemen, to fight against Houthis. They reported that as many as 14,000 Sudanese militiamen were fighting in the war, many of them children. 283, 284. 285. In March 2019, it was reported that British SAS Special Forces had allegedly been involved in training child soldiers in Yemen. 286. In March 2019, Al Jazeera reported that Saudi Arabia recruited Yemeni children to guard the Saudi Arabia-Yemen border against Houthis. 282. In January 2022, the UN reported that 1,406 child soldiers recruited by the Houthis had died on the battlefield in 2020, and 562 had died between January and May 2021. 287. In February 2022, unknown armed men kidnapped 5 United Nations personnel in southern Yemen as they were returning to Aden after a field tour. According to Russell Geeky, a spokesman for the top unofficial in Yemen, the crew was kidnapped on Friday, the 11th of February 2022, in the Abiyan Governorate. 288. In August 2023, the kidnapped United Nations personnel were released. 289. Impact on citizens, children and women. Code Pink anti-war activists protest U.S. Senators supporting Saudi U.S. arms deals. December 2017. According to UN estimates, the war has directly caused the death of over 3,000 children as of December 2020, while indirect causes of war, lack of food, health and infrastructure, have led to additional deaths. 290. The UN estimates that at the end of 2021, 70% of all the casualties of the war, around 259,000, are children under 5. 291. Yemeni refugee women and children are extremely susceptible to smuggling and human trafficking. 292. NGOs report that vulnerable populations in Yemen were at increased risk for human trafficking in 2015 because of ongoing armed conflict, civil unrest, and lawlessness. Migrant workers from the Somalia who remained in Yemen during this period suffered from increased violence, and women and children became most vulnerable to human trafficking. Prostitution on women and child sex slaves is a social issue in Yemen. Citizens of other Gulf states are beginning to be drawn into the sex tourism industry. The poorest people in Yemen work locally, and children are commonly sold as sex slaves abroad. While this issue is worsening, the plight of Somalis in Yemen has been ignored by the government. 293. Emphasizing the dire humanitarian needs for about 23.4 million people, UNFPA reported the lack of access to sexual and reproductive health and protection services, and exposure to death in pregnancy and childbirth and life-threatening violence. An increase in child marriage as a coping mechanism by impoverished families as the conflict continues was also reported. 294. Children are recruited between the ages of 13 and 17, and as young as 10 years old into armed forces despite a law against it in 1991. The rate of militant recruitment in Yemen increases exponentially. According to an international organization, between the 26th of March and the 24th of April, 2015, armed groups recruited at least 140 children. 295. According to the New York Times report, 1.8 million children in Yemen are extremely subject to malnutrition in 2018. 296. Both the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthis were blacklisted by the UN over the deaths of children during war. In 2016, Saudi Arabia was removed from the list after alleged pressure from Gulf countries who threatened to withdraw hundreds of millions of dollars in assistance to the UN. The decision was criticized by human rights groups, and the coalition added again in 2017 and was accused of killing or injuring 683 children, and attacking many of schools and hospitals in 38 confirmed attacks, while the Houthis were accused of being responsible for 414 child casualties in 2016. 297, 298, 299, on the 16th of June, 2020. The United Nations removed the Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen war from an annual blacklist of parties violating children's rights. The decision was taken despite the UN finding that the coalition operations killed or injured nearly 222 children in Yemen in 2019. The Saudi-led coalition's removal from the blacklist leaves Yemeni children vulnerable to future attacks. 300. In mid-May 2019, a series of Saudi/Emirati-led airstrikes hit Houthi targets on the outskirts of Sana'a. One of the airstrikes destroyed several homes, killing 5 civilians and injuring more than 30. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, while 4,800 of about 7,000 civilian fatalities have been caused by the Saudi-led coalition since 2016, the Houthis are accountable for 1,300 civilian deaths. 301, according to UNICEF. 2 million children have dropped out of school in Yemen since the conflict began in March 2015. The education of other 3.7 million children is uncertain as the teachers have not received salaries in the last 2 years. 302, on the 9th of October, 2019, children's advocacy group, Save the Children warned of a significant rise in cholera cases in northern Yemen. The crisis caused by increase in fuel shortages has affected several thousand children and their families. 303, health. The Yemeni civil war has often been referred to as the world's forgotten war. 304, 305, in 2018, the United Nations warned that 13 million Yemeni civilians face starvation in what it says could become the worst famine in the world in 100 years. 306. The UN estimates that the war caused an estimated 230,000 deaths by December 2020, of which 130,000 were from indirect causes which include lack of food, health services and infrastructure. 290. Earlier estimates from 2018 from Save the Children estimated that 85,000 children have died due to starvation in the 3 years prior. 307. Between October 2016 and August 2019, over 2,036,960 suspected cholera cases were reported in Yemen, including 3,716 related deaths, fatality rate of 0.18%. 308. The seasonal flu virus in Yemen has claimed more than 270 lives since October 2019. Poor medical facilities and widespread poverty in Yemen due to the war waged by Saudi-led coalition and Houthis harbored to the deaths of many infected patients in their homes. 309. Between April and July 2020, research showed that there was a peak in daily excess burial rates of approximately 1,500 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. 310. The overall disease surveillance in Yemen was also affected by the armed conflict. The disease early warning system was fragmented, with the government without control of the system in Houthis controlled areas and vice versa. 311. 312. The UN estimated that by the end of 2021, the conflict in Yemen had claimed more than 377,000 lives, and 70% of deaths were children under age 5. 135. 136. Religious minorities. The U.S. government estimates that religious minorities in Yemen constitute less than 1% of the population. They are categorized into 4 groups including Baha'is, Jews, Christians and Hindus. The Houthi movement has been said to be intolerant towards religious minorities. It was claimed that Houthis' attack even to their own practices has led to a discriminatory stance against other types of faiths present in territories that are under their control. The Baha'i international community stated that a number of Baha'is were imprisoned by the Houthi for religious reasons. 313